Not just 5 faiths, 6 faiths that you pick and choose. That is where this government that pays lip service to Swami Vivekananda actually betrays his own ideals. He would not be proud of a government that says, yeah, if you come from Afghanistan or Pakistan, or for that matter, Bangladesh, we will give you refuge, provided you of course belong to one of these religions. But if you come from, let us say, Sri Lanka, where you've also been suffering persecution during a civil war, sorry, you have to go through other procedures. We are not going to help you. So, when you ask them, how do you come to these criteria, they have no answer. They tell you, first of all, that these are the neighboring countries where minorities are persecuted. Well, I can tell you there are other neighboring countries. Myanmar was actually a part of India till 1935. It was only separated then from the British Raj. Yes. In Myanmar in 1935, till 1935, you actually had Indian law and Indian officials and Indian currency all applying. Now in Myanmar, what do you have? You have a whole bunch of people being persecuted, fleeing into Bangladesh, into India, called the Rohingyas. But their great misfortune with this government is they happen to be Muslim. So they don't fit in. And nor does Myanmar get mentioned amongst the countries concerned. If they say they're standing up for Hindus, then we ask them about the Sri Lankan Tamils, many of whom are Hindus, most of them perhaps are Hindus. But it seems this government is only interested in Hindi-speaking Hindus, I'm sorry. So, where do we get their principles from? Is it true that Muslims cannot be persecuted in a Muslim country? Absolutely not true. We have ourselves given asylum to Muslims from Bangladesh and Pakistan in the past, to Hazaras from Afghanistan, to some Shias and many Ahmadiyyas from Pakistan, and to individual writers of conscience, people like Taslima Nasreen, Dawood Haider, have come and sought refuge here because of persecution from previous Bangladeshi governments. How can this government stand up and say that they've left out Muslims because Muslims can never be persecuted in Muslim countries? The fact is, there is no principle behind this law that can be justified in terms of asylum practice, in terms of refugee law, in terms of international standards. There is no principle whatsoever behind this. What there is simple and sheer bias and bigotry. It is a desire, part of a whole series of measures this government is bringing forward, to marginalize one community amongst us, just one set of people, just our Muslim brothers and sisters. And to make matters worse, as you well know, the Home Minister said in both houses of Parliament, and repeated in half a dozen interviews that we have all seen, there may be more, that as far as he was concerned, the CAA was the first step. It would be followed by a nationwide NRC, a National Register of Citizens. Now what's the danger there? The danger is that the CAA has already sent a signal that some animals are more equal than others, to quote George Orwell. So imagine the NRC is being conducted nationwide, and officials ask you for documentation to prove where you are born, where you were born, when you were born, who are you, and of course if you're born after 87, you also have to prove that at least one of your parents was also born in India with a birth certificate or some other proof that is acceptable to the government. Now, how many people have this documentation? The rough estimate is that 65% of the population of India is undocumented. The poor, the marginalized, the rural, minority communities, tribals, many people have no birth certificates at any stage, have never had them. And then, to make matters worse, a minister in Mr. Modi's government, a member of the Council of Ministers, General V.K. Singh, who used to be the Chief of the Army Staff, actually went to court to claim that he didn't have a birth certificate and that the date of birth recorded by the army was wrong because it was a school admission date and not his actual date of birth. Now, if a minister is unable to give you a birth certificate, how many poor Indians are going to be able to do that? Now, it gets worse. The government then will have the right to demand that unless you are able to surrender such proof, that you cannot be on the National Register of Citizens. Who gets left out? Under the CAA, we all know that members of 6 communities who account for 80% of India's population, little more, 84, 85% of India's population are covered by those communities, they will eventually get a free pass. Because they've already been given a free pass in the CAA, the same principles will apply. One community will be singled out to ask for this proof. A Hindu without proof may find some other way of establishing who he is. A Muslim without proof, the onus will be on him or her to demonstrate that they have the legal claim to be Indian. I ask the non-Muslims in this group, is this the country that you grew up in, that you cherish, that you value? Is it?
No.
Do you want in your name a government to say that only one community will have different standards applied to it? You tell me.
No.
That's exactly the issue, my dear friends. It's the moral issue, the legal issue, and then there is a practical issue. Now, thanks to your opposition, the opposition of other students in campuses, the opposition of ordinary people stepping out into the streets, women like the women of Shaheen Bagh, whom I have just gone and met, women in the 80s and 90s, the Dadimas of Shaheen Bagh, sitting there since before New Year's, every night in the cold, speaking up for their convictions. The fact is, it's because of all of you that our Prime Minister came to Ramlila Maidan and declared, there has never been discussion of NRC. Now clearly one of us only has a nodding acquaintance with the truth. And as far as I'm concerned, I've heard the Home Minister mention the NRC. With my own eyes and ears, I've seen it in the Lok Sabha. I'm sure there are 400 other witnesses to that statement. There are videotapes of his interviews. To suggest the NRC was actually not on the government's agenda seems, putting it mildly, preposterous. But if it's a way of signaling that they're backing off from the NRC, well and good. But are they really? What they have done now is they have come up with something called the NPR. Now the NPR existed on paper. It was passed by Mr. Vajpayee's government in 2003. And under the NPR, the government has the right to record the names as well of every Indian citizen, so they can be a national register population. When the UPA government came to power, they came up with Aadhaar, and there was some concern about duplication. If Aadhaar covers everybody, then you already have everyone's names and biometrics. Why do you need an NPR? But what is worse is what has happened now. The government has issued rules and guidelines for those who would conduct the NPR, the National Population Register. And those guidelines require them to ask a question that was not in the NPR in the earlier iteration of 2010. And that question is, where were your parents born? And then what is more, it says that the enumerator, the person who's going and asking these questions, has the right to mark such and such family or such and such individual is of dubious citizenship. And those of dubious citizenship will be further interrogated. So the NPR is a backdoor way of delivering the NRC. That is the next challenge facing this nation. That you may end up in a situation in which officially the government says, okay, we are dropping the idea of a nationwide NRC. So meanwhile, please cooperate. Along with the census, let's have the NPR. But let me tell you, the census is authorized by the Census Act. The NPR is an amendment to the Citizenship Act, just like the NRC. So the issue is of the purpose of the NPR exercise should leave you in no doubt. This is why the Congress Party's working committee yesterday announced that Congress rules states will not, and I repeat, will not cooperate with the NPR exercise. And already the state governments of Kerala and West Bengal have also announced they will not cooperate. That gives us some hope, because what does the decision not to cooperate mean? You see, when a census is conducted, and by the same logic when an NPR is conducted, you need local government officials, state employees. They could be school teachers of state government schools, they could be government officials at various ranks who have to be assigned to this duty, just as they're assigned to election duty. Well, if the state government says, we will not assign our personnel to do it, the central government has no means independent of the state government to have that many employees in each state to conduct such an exercise. And therefore the hope is that the resistance of the state governments will prevent this happening. Can the central government get away with some other kind of action? In theory, yes. In theory, the central government could use its powers under Article 356 and dismiss these governments for refusing to cooperate with them, and then conduct the exercise essentially under orders from above. That would be such a severe assault on Indian democracy that I cannot believe the people of this nation will stand for it. I believe that they've already bitten off more than they can chew, and if they are foolish enough to try such an exercise and bring president's rule to all these states, denying the voters the result of their free franchise in our democracy, if they do that, then I will have to say, I think democracy as we know it in this country will be finished, and what we will have will be, first of all, anarchy in response, and secondly, I must say, international opprobrium that will shame this government, make it impossible for this Prime Minister and his minions to hold their heads high in the world. So that is the option they're going to face. Either they accept that they have gone too far, they respect the democratic will of the non-BJP governments who will not implement the NPR/NRC exercise, or they decide to destroy this country along with their foolish obduracy. And all I can say is, this country is far too precious to be destroyed for the political ego of a couple of people. We have to stand firm in principle behind this, because, and that was the other part of my topic today, what it means to be an Indian is fundamental to the nationalist movement. The nationalist movement stood up for an India that would belong to everyone. In fact, when the nationalist movement divided, it did not divide on ideological grounds. It did not divide, for example, on Marxist versus capitalist. It did not divide on geographical grounds, north versus south. It divided on one principle alone, and that principle was, should religion be the determinant of nationhood? Some people said it should be, that their religion was their nation, that was their identity, that was the idea of Pakistan. They formed a country called Pakistan. But everybody else, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. Ambedkar, Maulana Azad, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, you name all the giants of that time, they unanimously insisted that the freedom struggle had been a struggle for the freedom of everyone, and that they were going to create a country for everyone. As that flag stands, it stands for all faiths, all religions, all castes, all languages, all the people of our country. That is the idea of India that we have cherished for so long. That is the India that the Congress Party has stood for. But more important than the Congress Party, that is the idea that our Constitution reflects. And this is why I still hope that when the Supreme Court finally deigns to consider the slew of petitions that have gone to them against the CAA, that they will see why and how fundamentally this law is unconstitutional. Because it is an assault on that basic underpinning of what India is all about. If India meant anything in the world for the last 72 years, it was precisely that, the extraordinary democratic management of the most astonishing diversity that all of us represent. That it was a country that absolutely could overlook or endure or overcome differences of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of cuisine, of conviction, of costume and custom, and still maintain a consensus. And what was that consensus? That consensus was on the simple idea that in a large, diverse democracy like India, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. That is what India was all about. But for the first time after 72 years, we have a government that is showing no respect for those ground rules of disagreement, that has decided, in fact, to violate the ground rules and make our country something other than what India was meant to be all about. Now, as far as this larger issue is concerned, all of you were right to protest. I know there are other elements in your protest as well. I too was shocked to read about the fee hike. I was, remember, for a little over a year, a minister in the Ministry of HRD, and I certainly would never have accepted in the ministry a unilateral fee hike without consultation with students, implemented without advance warning. To my mind, when I read statements in the media that perhaps 40% of JNU students will not be able to continue their studies because they can't afford that hike, that is something that truly worries me. And to me, what we need to do about the fee hike is to insist that in any case it not be implemented in the current academic year, because obviously people deserve to be consulted and deserve to have fair warning, including those who will have to make new provisions. Scholarship students, for example, have a budget. Are they going to be able to suddenly find a whole bunch of money that was not in their budget? So very clearly a process has to be initiated. We can understand that costs are going up and this government is broke, very often because of its own foolish policies, I might add. But that's another matter. The government doesn't have the money they claim. Fair enough, sit down with the student representatives. Find out how much the traffic will bear. Then announce a schedule of staggered increases for future academic years. Don't suddenly hit people on the head with a sudden shocking increase overnight. That is undemocratic. It is also violative of the way in which traditionally we have gone about our business in this country. Our country has always respected the value of public education. We have believed that education is a public good, that it's in India's collective interest to have a larger number of people affording and having access to a high quality education. That became one of JNU's hallmarks. It was a campus that was proud of the fact that people whose families may have never had access to higher education were able to send their children to study here partly because the fees were kept low. Of course, there are standards of excellence and of academic accomplishment that also need to be maintained to get into JNU, but money was never expected to be a major obstacle for people from the humblest families. Now you cannot create a situation where you undo that fundamental USP of this university and attack the students where it hurts, where their wallets are empty. So on this issue, I want to stress, we will absolutely support you if we're able to discuss the issue in Parliament. We will take the stand this is not the right way to proceed, and that even if they need to raise costs, it cannot be done overnight, it cannot be done without consultation, it can only be done in a staggered way and over future years. That's the only way that a responsible government running a public university should have proceeded. But I fear there is a larger agenda. There is a larger agenda against JNU on the part of some in this country, some in the ruling party, who have never liked the quality of the students coming out of here, their political values and beliefs. And to me, it's deeply unfortunate. I mean, I realize my own party colleagues have not had an easy time fighting elections in JNU, but that's life. In democracy, we have to stand up, we have to try and persuade all of you, and if others persuaded you more, that's their right. And I think the ruling party needs to learn that's how democracy works, rather than undermining the entire institution, rather than distributing videos of doubtful authenticity and then applying a label to an entire campus on the basis of that. I mean, I think it's ridiculous now that Tukde gang is now a reflexive statement about JNU, whereas the only people who are trying to turn this country into Tukde are the people ruling it today. They're the ones who are dividing Hindu from Muslim. They're the ones who are dividing Hindi speakers and non-Hindi speakers. They're the ones who have sadly used a politics of such polarization that they are the real Tukde gang of this country. And all of you can stand up with pride and speak for India's unity, because that's what you all reflect. Here is a campus where every state in the country is represented. Here is a campus where every religion in the country is represented. Here is a campus where every caste in the country is represented. And here is a campus where every political opinion in the country is also represented. And that ultimately is JNU's strength. We should value that. We should celebrate it. We should not undermine it. So I'm going to try and stop here because I really want to take some questions from all of you. Many of you have many things in mind, and I'm very happy to address them. At least half a dozen questions, depending on how much time. I realize it's very much later than any of you had bargained for, that I had planned on. But I do want to say to you in this interaction, I've come here as much to listen as to speak. I do want to hear your views. At the same time, if you can keep your questions relatively brief, that'll give us more time, all of us, to exchange views on a wide variety of subjects. And finally, let me say,